Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today we are reviewing the Corsair HS80 Max. This is the new and improved version of the HS80, which came out a couple years ago, and the price went up, but also the feature count. So in this review, it's going to be long and in-depth because there's a lot to cover here, so I will have chapters in the description below. Now, I always have a disclaimer in the beginning on if a product was sent to me for review or not, and if you notice, I have two of them, and that's because my press release sample didn't show up right away. I actually only got the press version a couple days ago, and I bought the HS80 Max at launch so I could have more time with it. So one of them was sent to me for review, which worked out because I had some issues. Now I'm going to get into all that after, but this was a good way for me to validate if some of the issues I had was tied to one headset or not, or if it was just to both HS80 Maxes. So we'll get into the weeds. Now, it's important to cover a couple other things as far as what's changed and how it compares to the old one. Now, one of the first upgrades over the old HS80 is battery life, and it may not sound like much at the surface value because the old one was listed for 20 hours and this is listed for 24. With RGB on, this is rated for 24 hours, but I actually am getting closer to 26 myself. If RGB is off, however, you get 65 hours of battery life without any lights, and that's on the 2.4 gigahertz connection. And if you switch over to Bluetooth only, because it says Bluetooth now, you can expect upwards of 130 plus hours. Now, just like the old HS80, the Max has USB-C for charging, and it's a nice braided cable, so overall pretty much what you'd expect. It's a nice firm seat, by the way. The plug is a little bit larger and it has a really solid connection, so you can charge this while you're playing. Another welcome addition is it does rapid charging now, so if you need a quick charge, 15 minutes on this cord will give you 6 hours of game time, which is a welcome addition because a lot of competitors are doing that now. Now, there is one caveat to this headset compared to the old one that was kind of surprising to me. So the new HS80 Max, the dongle supports 24-bit 96 kilohertz wirelessly, which is awesome. So we'll get into more of the dongle performance here shortly. But what's interesting is the Max does not support a USB-C headset connection. So what that means is the old HS80, you could just use the USB-C cable only, not use the dongle, and have it as a wired gaming headset. And that was the only way you can get 24-bit 96 kilohertz on the old HS80. Maybe because the new HS80 can support that sample rate through the wireless dongle, they omitted it. So I do want to call out, if you planned on using this as a USB headset to replace your old one, that function no longer exists. Now, because the HS80 still does not have an aux input, you cannot use this on Xbox. Corsair makes the HS75XB for Xbox, but it's really not the same. It's a very different headset in almost in every single way. So I wish there was a way to make it work, but the primary platforms of choice here are for PlayStation and PC. Now, there are two other features that aren't present on the HS80 Max that I wish they added, but I just want to call out how it comes. So there is still no game to chat mix on it. So on Windows, you basically just have one device output. You can cheat that a little bit if you use something like SteelSeries Sonar or some kind of virtual audio driver, where you then use controller or like software controller to mix your audio output. But the headset itself only has a single audio input. The other thing that's missing, unfortunately, is it still has no onboard EQ. So if you're playing on PlayStation, you are basically stuck with the sound profile out of the box. Kind of a bummer, but on the PC side, you have a lot of options. Now, you can use the iCUE built-in equalizer, which has to be running, of course, in the background to utilize. And if that's running, pressing the volume wheel on the headset will actually toggle through all your EQ presets. You can customize the EQ and save your own presets, but again, it's not saving to the headset, it's just saving on the software, so iCUE always has to be running. Now, the HS80 Max also comes with a Dolby Atmos license, which I tend to prefer. I'm getting ahead of myself, but you can also do custom EQ on Dolby Atmos, in which you would just set your iCUE equalizer to flat. Now, what's really cool is this also uses Sound ID from SonarWorks, which takes away all the guesswork from EQ if you want to try it. Now, I reviewed the Corsair HS65 several months ago, and that was an earlier iteration of the Sound ID software, which basically does a series of listening tests. You complete each question and say, of an A-B sample, which sound you prefer. The new one also takes into account how good your hearing is, and if there's different frequency fall-offs, it helps compensate to make sure you're hearing sounds the way you're supposed to. So it's not perfect. Now, the old one produced a sound profile I didn't really like. I ended up just doing custom EQ. This one, the new version, actually got the HS80 closer to my target EQ that I would prefer, aside from a really strong deep bass boost, which I didn't know how that happened. So what I would suggest is at least try it, see if it gives you the sound profile you like, because it's tailored for you. And then if so, great, then you can just run with it and you don't have to touch anything else. Otherwise, we'll get into custom EQ later in this video to tune it to what I think makes it even more competitive. Now there's a test I like to do now called the toilet test, because let's face it, sometimes, especially with a wireless headset, you may leave the room for a minute to get a snack or use the restroom. And the old HS80, even though it was a low latency, high quality transmitter, the range was pretty poor. It was on one of the lowest ends as far as distance goes from the dongle itself. And I would only get like 20 feet in clear line of sight, but realistically it would drop as soon as 15 feet. The new one, and I measured this through 2 walls, I could go about 52 to 54 feet before it dropped. So the range improvement, I got nervous because they increased the sample rate, which can put a little bit more stress on bandwidth. But I got a much stronger, longer range, and that's huge. So this does 100% pass the toilet test. You are free to roam around several rooms in your home and you shouldn't really have any issues. So that's a huge improvement over the old one. So the HS80 Max I know is built well for one reason, and it's because the little dark secret of how often I still use the HS80 to this day. Even though it's not one of my preferred headsets in terms of pure sound quality, I wear this thing like half the day when I'm working my day job. And I liked it just because it's extremely comfortable for long listening sessions, but the microphone is incredible. The HS80 has a reputation of arguably one of the best wireless mics you've ever heard. So because of that, I have more hours on this than most headsets I own, and it still looks and feels just like when I bought it, which is over a year of heavy use. So I know this is built well. Now, part of that comes to do with the way the fork design is. Now, this fork is all metal. All of these components that I'm touching right now is metal, and I took this apart, and the inside mounting mechanism is also metal. So it's built really well on the hinges because that's where all your stress and wear and tear goes. The top part is plastic and the ear cups are plastic, but these don't need to be metal, and it does keep the weight and price down. Now, comfort is also excellent, but for a few various reasons. One, this uses a suspension head strap, which is my favorite design of all of the Corsair headsets. This just fits my head incredibly well. And with a suspension strap like this, you get rid of a hard pressure point, so it's very comfortable to wear. Even though it's a suspension band, this is still padded too, which is nice. If you need to change the sizing of it, all you do is pop this out, and I can tighten this. Obviously, this is a little too tight here, but once you dial that in, just press the Velcro down, and your strap is good to go for your head size. If you have a very large head, I've seen some customer reviews online where they say it didn't quite get large enough to fit their head, but for most head sizes, I think this design is flexible enough because there's quite a bit of give as far as what size you get out of the suspension strap. Now, the HS80 Max is still very comfortable, just like the old HS80, and the weight is not on the lowest side. So this is saying 358 grams. I think I'm getting between 354 and 358 whenever I put it on the scale. That, with the clamp force and the cloth ear pads, makes it a very comfortable headset. Now, the clamp force is a little bit stronger than the Nova 7s. So if you have a Nova headset and you are thinking about upgrading or switching, just to give you perspective, the clamp is a little stronger than that. However, it's not as strong as something like the Turtle Beach Stealth 700. I find this clamp to be more of my preference because it's just light enough to where it's not hurting, but it's also secure enough where if I'm moving my head around with this kind of weight, it doesn't feel like it's shifting or coming off my head. Because these have cloth pads, which are very comfortable, they are also a little bit more sensitive to ear placement. So you have to make sure you put it in the right spot, and having a slightly stronger clamp force means it should help maintain a more consistent sound performance. You don't want to be chewing or talking and moving around and all of the bass is gone because it's not keeping adequate pressure on your head. So I like that they went with this approach. Now, I mentioned the pads are comfortable, and if you're noticing, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, one of these has blue tape because I have different firmware versions on these, so I'll talk about that after. But I put the Wicked Cushions freeze pads on here, on one of them, just to show you the difference, and then these are the stock pads. The stock pads are a cloth fabric material, and it's typically my preferred material because, yes, they can get a little bit warm, but because they're not fully sealing anything in, they're also very comfortable for a long period of time. You shouldn't sweat as much as in these than you do to something like a full leatherette pad. So they can be a little scratchy for some people. Some people may not like this material, but this also does affect the sound quality. So when you look at the Wicked Cushions pads, which are these gel, they are heavier. That it's going to add, I think it adds about 60 grams of weight, if I'm not mistaken, in pad weight alone when you combine. But the new pads are deeper. They are very soft and plush. They do help on the initial like pillowy feel when you first put them on. They're very comfortable. However, I don't think one is necessarily much more comfortable than the other, because it may come down to personal preference for how the temperature is on your head. These seem cooler and more comfortable at first, but can get a little bit warmer for a very long listening session. The stock pads get warmer faster, but they don't get as hot because they are breathing. Now, on the note of the pads, fabric pads don't have the same noise isolation, so you're not going to get the same bass extension as you would on a big thick pad like this. The bass is deeper on a Wicked Cushion pad. It also has a more recessed upper mid-range and treble region, so this will sound a little bit darker and deeper sounding, or bassy I guess, and this one's going to be a little bit more vocal forward and a little bit more neutral. You can fix all this with EQ, but on the PlayStation side, if you don't want the extra bass, then stick with the stock pad. However, if you find the bass lacking, you could just do a simple pad swap, and that's going to bring more of that rumble effect out of the headset. Now, the stock pads are 45 millimeters wide and 45 to 55 millimeters high, depending on where you measure it. Now, the Wicked Cushions basically adds 5 millimeters to every one of those dimensions, making them larger and give you more space. The depth also increases. The stock pad is 22 millimeters thick, and the Wicked Cushions pad is over 30 millimeters thick. I don't think this headset necessarily needs Wicked Cushions because it's going to come down to personal preference. I think some people are going to prefer the stock pad, and some will prefer Wicked Cushions. If you decide to switch to Wicked Cushions, whether it be for the physical sizing or the change in sound quality or comfort, I will have a link in the description below to take 15% off. That works on Amazon and their site, and it'll save you some money. Now, different pad properties will affect glasses comfort as well. Both of these are good in different ways. The stock pad is very forgiving because of this cloth fabric, but it's not as plush or pillowy as the Wicked Cushion pad. So because this pad is smaller, it really comes down to what size glasses you're wearing. If you have a thicker frame that goes farther back behind your ear, you are going to feel a little bit pressure on the rear pad. When I use my thickest Gunnar glasses, I have a few different frames. On my thicker pair, this had a little bit less pressure. The stock pad overall, because of the way the pad depth is, it's a little bit thinner, so the clamp is slightly lighter, but I did feel pressure on the front and back around my ear. On the Wicked Cushion pad, I felt only pressure on the front. Now, part of that issue is because the clamp force is just slightly higher and I'm only putting pressure on the front. That pressure was just slightly stronger. Now, neither of them were uncomfortable. Neither of these had an adverse reaction to sound quality when you wear glasses. It really comes down to what frame you want, but I think ultimately they're both going to be comfortable enough for long listening sessions. I just wanted to point out how they feel depending on the pad and glasses. Now, I didn't mention this before, but in case you do decide to upgrade the pad, it takes seconds. On Corsair HS80s, the left ear cup rotates counterclockwise and the right is clockwise. And once you rotate it, you'll feel a little pop. It takes a little bit of pressure. And the Wicked Cushions is the same exact way. You basically just do that, line it up, and then pressure and turn it on, you're good to go. Now, as far as physical design goes and the buttons and layout, it's almost identical to the old one, but they did make some silent improvements, if you will. So the power button on the new one, it's in the same spot, everything's laid out the same way, but the new power button is textured, which I really like. Another thing that they did, they actually improved the buttons in these. So instead of a softer click, I'm just gonna do the audio check so you can hear it. The old HS80 power button sounded like this, and then the new HS80 sounds like this. It's much more tactile. It actually feels much better to press, so I appreciate that they're improving even little things like that. The volume wheels both feel the same. They have a nice texture to them, and I took it apart, and the inner workings, like the mechanics of the volume wheel, look the same. You can see that the button physically changed as well. On the right side, the new HS80 Max has a Bluetooth button, which is also textured, and it's nice and big, so it's easy to handle. The old one, of course, does not. And then when you look at the bottom, you have the USB-C port on the same spot here, and they both have the same flip to mute mic mechanism. However, on the new one, and I took this apart because it felt different. The old one had like a plastic friction point, and that's what gave you the resistance that you feel on the mic. It worked fine, it's durable, and you can feel a little detent right here. So once you pass it, there's like a very soft click feeling. The new one, they actually have a rubber skate in the mechanism that rotates. So it actually feels like more plush, I guess more dampened. Everything just feels softer and more refined, and you still get that detent. So the initial handling, it looks the same, but if you owned both, everything just feels like it's just built a little bit better because of those minor attention to detail. Now I mentioned this earlier, but just to elaborate, pressing in on the volume wheel does toggle through your IQ, EQ presets if you are using those, but you can reassign it to do other things instead. That includes muting the game, activating or changing your voice mod if you installed that plugin. You can launch applications with it, or even send a keystroke command by pressing that button in. So if you're not using the IQ equalizer built in because you're using Atmos or something else, I love that you can reassign it because at least it gives you a little bit more versatility. On the power button, so when this thing is on, it's going to turn on in the last mode it was in. Because this does Bluetooth, it does not do simultaneous Bluetooth, which is kind of a bummer, but most headsets in this price range don't, unless you look at Turtle Beach or SteelSeries. The rest of them pretty much don't have simultaneous. So right now I am in the Wi-Fi mode by default, and my LED here is green because my battery is on the full side. It can go to orange if it's halfway and red if the battery is low. And then you can see my mic blinking because my mic is muted. Now, I don't have an active connection, so none of this is going to change right now, but there is also a voice prompt when you flip to mute. I do like the way this flip to mute does. There's a little tone and a voice. You can disable all that later if you don't want to hear it. But if you press this power button just once, you're going to see this light change. And now my microphone is blinking blue. That means my headset is in Bluetooth mode and it'll connect to my phone. Pressing it again will quickly switch back to the wireless option. Now, if you are on the 2.4 gigahertz wireless connection because you're playing a game on your computer, this can still pair to your phone. You just won't hear it. However, if you get a phone call, pressing the Bluetooth button will answer the phone call. It'll switch to that. After you're done with your call, it'll automatically switch back to 2.4. So it's not perfect, but this is usually what more people use the Bluetooth for than anything else. It would have been nice to have them merge the two together if in case you like listening to music while you play. But it is what it is. Now, as I mentioned, part of the reason for the delay of this review was because of the microphone discrepancy from the old HS80, which sounds incredible. The new one out of the box sounded pretty bad and compressed, and I could not understand why. So, sure enough, the new firmware drops a few days ago, and here we are. Now, I flashed this one to the new firmware, which took a while. I actually had some issues doing that. I flashed on my Mac, but on Windows, it was kind of a nightmare. So I think by the time most people are getting and using this, they'll have already fixed the IQ firmware update. However, it might be a series of unplugging, rebooting, checking updates, things like that to get it to work. So now I'm talking to you on the new HS80 Max using the launch firmware. This is before the update was applied, and if you're wearing headphones or IEMs, you're probably hearing a noticeable amount of compression and artifacting. This is why I was kind of shocked and confused on how they could take the old HS80 and make it sound this way. So thankfully, the new firmware came out, so let's talk to you on that. All right, now I'm talking on the HS80 Max using the new firmware, which makes it sound like the old HS80. Not a bad thing in this case because the HS80 was the benchmark, like I said. So this sounds noticeably better. I strongly recommend upgrading your firmware because I didn't have any other issues with it. The other advantage to the new firmware is the headset got noticeably louder as well. I feel like I gained like 30% more volume. So it's a really good firmware to apply. So just in case you want to hear what flip to mute sounds like, at least what your friends would hear if you do that, I'm going to do that now. And now I am back on. So the side tone, I do want to cover that. The side tone is pretty poor on the HS80 Max. They didn't really improve it off the old HS80. You can boost the volume in IQ. However, the side tone volume is fairly faint and more robotic. Ironically, the side tone sounds worse than the actual recording being sent to the computer. So I'm not a huge fan. I would leave it off or very low, if anything. So when it comes to sound quality, I want to start with the objective side first. And the objective side is the measurement side. This is stuff that takes my own personal opinion or interpretation out of the mix. And it's really helpful if you're shopping other products in the same price range to see how the sound profiles stack up. Maybe you own a different product and you know what it measures like. And when you compare it to this, it'll give you an idea what to expect. So on this review, this is the first time I am releasing my measurement database to the public. Now, part of that isn't thanks to another YouTuber called Super Review. So huge shout out to him. His channel's bigger than mine, and he's really into this stuff. He measures and reviews a lot of IEMs, some headphones and other products. So I'll have a link on the screen and description below, but he helps run this giant database called SquigLink, and other reviewers use it as well to store their measurements. So this is a great resource for understanding how different products measure. As far as I know, I'm the only one who's measuring headsets. So I've built this giant database. It doesn't have all my measurements yet, but I'll have a link in the description below to take you to it in case you want to compare. I'm also going to feature this on the video. So if you're looking for more YouTubers to discover, I strongly suggest taking a look at his profile. He's got some great IEM reviews. I've used him in the past to learn more about certain IEMs. So check him out, give him a sub, and maybe say thanks over from Gadgetry Tech. So let's start with the HS80 Max on a measurement side. The tuning is weird on the HS80 Max. It's not drastically better than the old one, although it is improved slightly. So if you look at it on a frequency response measurement, it's relatively flat. There's some dips in the mid-range, and there's not a lot of treble extension. What this translates to and what you hear is it can sound kind of dull and flat and compressed. Some people want that. And when you compare it to something like Razer's headsets, which are very much V-shaped, really strong emphasis in the bass, almost too much. Well, it is too much in a lot of cases. And then you get SteelSeries, which has good bass, but it's very forward in the vocal range. They measure completely different. So to a lot of people, if you're coming from any of those, it's going to sound rather dull. Now, the HS80 does take to EQ tuning really well, and I'll show some custom measurements and EQ presets later, but I also want to show you the old HS80 in comparison. So the green line is the new HS80 Max, and the blue line is the old HS80. Now this is over multiple measurements to ensure I got an accurate representation. The new one is improved but not by much. When you add the Harman curve over it, which is kind of like a general preferred curve, you can see it's not really on the mark here. So I addressed that later. But the important thing I want to call out is they did change the interior, the ear cup design on the inside because the electronics changed. I swear I could speak English. When I took these apart, one side has this like foam pad to, I guess, equalize the volume of the ear cup compared to the other one, which has the battery and the circuit board now. Whereas the old one was kind of a little more asymmetrical as far as the design goes. So naturally, a foam pad has different audio acoustic properties than a circuit board. However, it's a step in the right direction, and as a result, when I look at the left and right channel balance, you can see the HS80 Max still has a weird imbalance. It's not perfect, but when you compare it to the old HS80, there was an even bigger variance in the mid-range, and as a result, it was harder to expect a competitive performance when it comes to like footsteps and first-person shooters. So the new one's better. It's not class-leading by any means, but at least they did improve on it, and that was part of the reason why. Now, what's consistent with the HS80 and Max is the upper mid-range and treble sounds a bit veiled and recessed compared to most other gaming headsets in this price range. It's almost like there's a piece of fabric between your ear and the driver that is affecting or creating a veil to the sound. Thankfully, this does take to EQ really well, so we're going to get into all that, and I want to show you how that affects the sound quality. After doing some EQ tuning, I took more measurements, of course, because I wanted to get closer to what I think the HS80 should and could sound like. So just to go back on the original tune, the orange line is how the HS80 measured, and the pink line is the Harman curve, which is like a generally agreed upon sound signature, not for everybody, but just to give you perspective here. So after I used IQ to tune the headset, I got the sound signature to much more closely mimic the Harman curve. Now I can turn off the old measurement here, and this is how close I was able to hit. It does sound significantly better using this EQ, which I am now showing on the screen. Feel free to pause it here and match it in your own IQ, and you will get the same or comparable sound quality to this. Now, if you don't want to use IQ and you want to use Dolby Atmos for the spatial audio, here is the result of my Dolby Atmos tune. And even if I look at the IQ tune with it, you can see it's very, very similar. The Atmos tune has a little bit better mid-range performance, around 500 Hertz, but overall it's very comparable. And I like the Atmos tune because it also gives you good spatial audio. So here is a picture of the Atmos tune. Feel free to copy it, take a screenshot, whatever. And that again will bring the HS80 Max to where I think it should be. So getting into subjective quality and my own taste, I think you can see where this is going. Out of the box, it's a bit dull, it's a bit uneventful, laid back. It's a comfortable headset, and the stock sound is comfortable. It doesn't really excel anywhere, but it's still fine out of the box for casual games. You know, if playing Gran Turismo or some kind of a racing game or open world where you don't need the most excited sound profile, competitive edge type thing, the HS80 is still fine. I don't think it's as resolving as something that you get from HyperX or SteelSeries, for example. The detail retrieval doesn't seem to be as strong. However, after applying that EQ, the detail retrieval is immensely different. Like, it's a noticeable improvement. And I'm not saying that to be like biased and say use my tune, but this is a byproduct of changing the sound profile to look like that. It's not the most competitive headset for FPS. That hasn't changed, though it has improved. I still think the SteelSeries 7X or 7, Nova 7, the HyperX Cloud Alphas, and even the Logitech G Pro X2 wireless are a little bit better on the FPS side. That's just my personal preference, but I can still play first-person shooter games and feel like I'm good enough. I don't feel like it's giving me a massive advantage like a couple other headsets do. But I think the EQ helps. Now, tune it to your liking. After you do your EQ, if you think it's missing some bass, just boost it a little bit. Or if it's too dark or bright sounding, then play around with your treble. And I think the sound profile of the HS80 it's more relaxed. The soundstage isn't as wide or vast, but it's also not as forward or offensive as some other headsets. And I'm not saying that something like the SteelSeries Nova 7 is offensive, or the HyperX Alphas are, but they definitely are more forward in the upper mid-range and treble. Some people are sensitive to that and they find it too bright or fatiguing. The HS80 is more laid back, daily driver, comfy cruiser type headset. Now physically it's comfortable, but the sound profile is also comfortable. Again, it's not the ultimate esports style headset, but that's okay because not everyone needs the same product. I think for a majority of games and casual gaming, it's still fine. And when you compare this to music listening, the biggest downside to me is it doesn't seem as resolving on the very, very subtle details of music. It's not as nuanced or clear as the HyperX Alpha, in my opinion, but it's comparable to a lot of other headsets in this price range from a detail retrieval standpoint. So I strongly recommend EQing it if you are using it for music. Use one of those two presets because the difference in sound is pretty immense for music listening. So definitely try those out, and again, tune to your liking, and then let me know what you think, if you think it sounds better or not. Hopefully this was helpful for you and getting the most out of your HS80. So that wraps up the review. You made it to the end. I hope you found this helpful. I knew it was going to be long, but there's a lot to cover because the HS80 kind of had its own niche back then between the build quality, microphone performance, etc., but it wasn't always like a class leader in sound. This is improved, not completely, but when you factor in the better battery life, the added Bluetooth, you still get the immense build quality, the microphone performance. Overall, it is an improved version of the HS80 in every way. And between inflation and the feature add-on, I could see why it's $180 now. So I know this headset isn't for everybody, but that's the beauty of it. Hopefully after watching this, you figured out if this is the right one for you or not. If so, I'll have a link in the description below to help you find it. Thank you so much for the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I'd love to see you at the next video. With that being said, I'll see you next time. Bye.